My name is Harper, I'm 38 years old, and the last thing my late grandmother ever gave me was her old rocking chair. It wasn't anything fancy or expensive, just a sturdy, time-worn piece of maple wood, its once bright floral cushions now faded from decades of use. But to me, it was more than furniture. It was a heartbeat, a voice, a reminder that someone had loved me so completely that she left behind a part of herself. Grandma Agnes used to say that every creak of that chair was like a whisper from the past. She'd sit in it every evening on her porch, humming old songs and watching the sun dip behind the cedar trees. When I was a little girl, I'd curl up on her lap and listen to her stories, tales of love, hardship, and resilience. She'd rock me until I fell asleep, her soft voice mixing with the sound of the chair's gentle rhythm. When she passed away, the world felt unbearably still. That chair became the only thing that still felt alive, as though it carried her spirit. So, when I moved into my first home, that rocking chair came with me. I placed it in the corner of the living room by the window, right where the sunlight touched it every morning. It didn't match the rest of the decor. My husband Owen liked sleek, modern furniture, glass and chrome and angles. He often teased me, saying the chair made the room look like a thrift store living room. But I didn't care. That chair was sacred. It represented love, family, and continuity. It was the one thing I refused to let go of, no matter how many times Owen hinted that we could upgrade or redecorate. Sometimes I'd come home from work, drop my bag and just sit there rocking, letting the motion calm my nerves. It reminded me of home in a way Owen never could. There was something healing about it, something grounding. I'd talk to Grandma sometimes, out loud, as if she were sitting right beside me. "You'd like it here," I'd tell her. "Small house, big dreams." I think, deep down, she heard me. Because every time I was lost or heartbroken, that chair somehow comforted me. But as much as I loved it, I never really thought much about its history beyond what it meant emotionally. I didn't wonder where it came from before Grandma's porch, or what secrets it might have held. To me, it was simply love in solid form. I remember one rainy evening when I was polishing the wood, running my fingers over every groove and nick. There were marks I didn't remember, like faint carvings near the armrest, initials that had worn down with time. I smiled, thinking maybe Grandpa had carved them decades ago. The chair had survived generations, storms, even house moves. It had outlasted almost everyone who'd ever sat in it. Maybe that's why I felt safe there, like nothing bad could reach me when I was in it. Owen didn't understand that kind of attachment. He'd roll his eyes whenever I mentioned Grandma, calling me sentimental. Sometimes, he'd even sit in the chair mockingly, rocking faster than it was meant to, grinning as it creaked too loudly. I'd always ask him to stop, not out of anger, but out of respect for what it symbolized. I suppose that's when I started realizing we saw the world differently. He valued things for how they looked. I valued them for how they felt. It was subtle then, but that difference would become the crack that widened everything between us. Over time, that chair became my refuge, a small rebellion in a house where I increasingly felt unseen. Whenever arguments happened, I'd retreat to it, rock quietly, and remember who I was before compromise dulled me. There was a night when I fell asleep in it, tears drying on my cheeks, and I could have sworn I heard Grandma's soft voice in my dreams saying, "Hold on to what's yours, Harper." I didn't know what she meant at the time. I thought she was talking about my spirit, my independence, but maybe she meant something else entirely. Because what I didn't know was that Grandma had left more than memories in that chair. She had left something tangible, something that would turn my world upside down. Something she'd trusted me to find, and I almost lost it before I ever knew it existed. That chair wasn't just a reminder of love, it was a vault, a secret keeper. And I was too blind to realize what I had until it was gone. And when the chair disappeared one afternoon, I didn't yet know I'd lost more than just wood and fabric. It was a Thursday when I came home from work and noticed the empty space in the living room. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The corner by the window looked wrong, too bright, too open. The sunlight fell directly on the floor where my grandmother's rocking chair should have been. I stood frozen, staring at the absence of something that had always been there. It felt like walking into a version of my home that didn't belong to me. The chair wasn't just missing, it had been erased. My heart started pounding, and I called out for Owen, trying to sound calm. He answered from the kitchen, his voice casual, like nothing was out of place. "Hey, you're home early," he said. I walked in, and before he could say anything else, I blurted out, "Where's Grandma's chair?" He didn't even look up from the sink. "Oh, that old thing? I sold it this morning." I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh or tell me he was joking, but he didn't. He just kept rinsing a glass like he hadn't just gutted my heart. "You sold it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You sold my grandmother's chair?" He sighed, setting the glass down. "Harper, come on. It was taking up space. You never even sit in it anymore." "That's not true," I snapped. "It's not clutter. It's family." He shrugged, completely unfazed. "It was falling apart. I figured we could use the space for something new. I got a decent price for it, too." His words barely made sense to me. I felt dizzy, like the floor had tilted. "You had no right to sell it," I whispered. "That chair meant something to me." "It's just furniture," he muttered, wiping his hands on a towel. That's when something inside me broke a little. Just furniture. He said it like it was a fact, like my memories didn't matter. My grandmother's laughter, her stories, her hands rocking me to sleep, it was all reduced to just furniture. I wanted to scream, to make him understand what he'd done, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Owen didn't understand sentimentality. He understood transactions. I turned away from him, fighting tears. The corner of the living room looked so wrong without the chair. Empty, sterile, heartless. Later that evening, while he watched TV as if nothing had happened, I sat on the floor in that empty space. My hands rested on the carpet, tracing the faint indent where the chair's legs used to stand. It was like touching a ghost. I kept replaying our conversation, hoping I'd misheard him, but the truth settled heavier each minute I'd lost something irreplaceable. Owen hadn't just taken away a piece of furniture, he'd sold the last physical piece of my grandmother. I asked him where he sold it. He said some couple owned a small antique shop downtown. "They seemed nice," he said. "They appreciated it more than you did." His words stung deeper than he knew. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the house feeling emptier than it ever had. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. It was strange I could still hear the rocking chair in my head. That familiar creak, that comforting rhythm. It haunted me. Around midnight, I got up and walked back to the living room. I stood where the chair once sat and whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have protected it." The next morning, I woke up with a strange urgency burning inside me. I needed to see that chair again, even if I couldn't take it back. I just needed to know it was safe. I didn't care if the shopkeepers thought I was crazy. But before leaving, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window, thinking about what Grandma used to say. "Things hold more than we think, Harper. Sometimes, they hold us." Back then, I thought it was just her way of being poetic. But now, her words felt different, almost like a warning. Maybe there was something more to that chair, something I never knew about. The thought stayed with me as I drove to work, the morning light flashing through the windshield like fragments of a memory. I didn't know yet that I was right, that the chair held more than just memories. I didn't know there was something hidden deep inside it, something that could alter everything I believed about my family, my marriage, and even my future. And then I remembered Grandma's words. "Never let anyone take what's truly yours, or you might lose more than you think." The next morning, I pulled out the old letter Grandma had written to me before she died. It had been tucked inside the back of my photo album for years, yellowed and delicate, with the faint smell of lavender that always reminded me of her. I hadn't read it in a long time, maybe because I didn't want to reopen that wound, but something inside me told me to look at it again. Her handwriting was as elegant as ever, each curve deliberate and graceful. "My dearest Harper," it began. "One day, when I'm gone, I want you to remember that peace isn't found in people, but in the things that remind you of love. Keep it close, for it keeps us safe." I'd always thought she meant the feeling of peace, not an actual object. But now, sitting at my kitchen table with the letter trembling in my hands, I realized she might have been speaking more literally than I ever imagined. I read the letter again and again, trying to decipher any hidden message. One sentence jumped out at me this time. "What is given in love may one day protect you. Look where you find your peace, and you'll find me." The words sent a chill down my spine. Where you find your peace. That chair had always been my place of peace. I leaned back in my seat, heart pounding. Could Grandma have meant the rocking chair? Was there something she'd hidden there? My mind raced. I'd owned that chair for years and never once thought to check it closely. I felt stupid for not realizing it sooner. What if she had left something for me, something important? Maybe a note, a photo, or even money. It wasn't impossible. Grandma was always sentimental, but she also had a knack for secrets. She'd hidden things before Christmas presents under floorboards, a jewelry box inside a flower pot. She used to say, "A secret's only safe if it's hiding in plain sight." I got up from the table and paced the kitchen, but the chair was gone. Sold. Out of reach. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I had to get it back. Not later. Not eventually. Now. I didn't care how much it cost. I didn't care what Owen thought. He'd already made it clear he didn't understand what the chair meant. This wasn't about nostalgia anymore, it was about something deeper, something Grandma wanted me to have. I remembered the name of the store Owen mentioned, Willow and Pine. I'd seen it before while driving downtown. It was one of those quaint little shops with weathered wooden signs and soft music playing through the open door. They specialized in restoring antique furniture. Maybe they hadn't done anything to the chair yet. Maybe I still had a chance. I called the store right away, but no one answered. So I decided I'd go there after work. I didn't even tell Owen. I wanted to handle it myself. The entire day felt like torture meetings blurred, phone calls went unanswered, and my stomach was a tight knot of nerves. The thought of that chair sitting in someone else's shop, its secrets possibly being touched or tampered with, made me feel sick. By the time I pulled into the parking lot that evening, the sun was already dipping low behind the hills. The store looked exactly how I remembered it, cozy, vintage, inviting. But inside, I knew there was something that belonged to me, something that should never have left my home. As I parked the car, a sudden thought hit me. What if someone had already bought it? The idea made my throat close up. I couldn't let that happen. I needed to see it with my own eyes. As I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, another memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought of in years. I was 10 years old, sitting in Grandma's lap in that same chair. She'd been telling me a story about her father losing the family farm because of a bad deal. If I'd had the papers then, she'd said, I could have saved it. I remembered asking what papers she meant, and she just smiled. It's not important, sweetheart. The past is past. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe those papers were exactly what she meant for me to find. The thought made my pulse quicken. Could it be possible that something like that, something legal, was hidden in the chair? Maybe the deed to the old property? My grandmother had always regretted selling that land. She'd talked about it like a wound that never healed. I suddenly felt certain there was more to this than sentiment. There was a reason she wanted me to keep that chair close. Maybe it was her way of making sure I could one day reclaim what she'd lost. I looked at the clock on my dashboard. It was almost closing time for the shop. I started the car, ready to go in and find out for myself. But as I sat there, a small voice inside whispered something both terrifying and exciting. What if someone had already discovered what was hidden? What if it wasn't mine to find anymore? I pushed that thought away, gripping Grandma's letter tightly in my hand. No, this was meant for me. I knew it. I had to believe it. I wouldn't let anyone take it from me, not again. When I finally drove toward Willow and Pine, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the road. I didn't know then that I was already too late. The chair had found new hands, and with it, the secret my grandmother had hidden so carefully for decades. And I had no idea the chair's new owners were already discovering what was inside. The store's name was Willow and Pine, and the owners, Melinda and Grant, were a cheerful couple in their 40s. From the moment I stepped inside, a wave of nostalgia hit me. The smell of old wood, leather-bound books, and polish filled the air, reminding me of my grandmother's house. The place was beautiful in its own way, rows of antique tables, shelves full of trinkets, and light filtering through lace curtains. For a second, I almost forgot why I was there. Then, I saw it. My grandmother's rocking chair sat by the front window, bathed in soft sunlight as if it belonged there. My heart skipped a beat. It looked just like I remembered, except for a few faint scratches on the armrest that hadn't been there before. I wanted to rush over, to run my fingers along the wood, but I forced myself to stay calm. A woman with short auburn hair and kind eyes approached me with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Willow and Pine. Looking for anything special today?" she asked. I smiled back, pretending to browse. Just looking around. You've got some beautiful pieces here. My eyes flicked toward the chair again. That one by the window, where did you find it? Oh, that old rocker? She said, walking over and lightly touching its backrest. A man brought it in a few days ago. Said his wife didn't want it anymore. Shame. Really, it's in lovely condition. My stomach twisted at the word his wife. That man was Owen. I clenched my hands behind my back to stop them from shaking. It's a beautiful piece, I said softly, keeping my voice steady. Would you be selling it? Her husband, Grant, appeared from the back room, wiping his hands on a cloth. He was tall, quiet, with a slow, deliberate way of moving. Haven't priced it yet, he said. Still giving it a once-over. Sometimes these old chairs hide more wear than you see. That line made my heart skip. What do you mean? I asked, too quickly. He shrugged. Loose joints, broken spindles, things stuffed in the cushions. You'd be surprised what people hide inside old furniture. I froze. He said it so casually, but my pulse roared in my ears. Really? I asked. People actually hide things? Oh, sure, Melinda said with a small laugh. We've found love letters, coins, even an old engagement ring once. You never know what history you'll uncover. Her words sent chills down my spine. I wanted to shout that the chair wasn't theirs to uncover, that it was mine, and whatever history it held was mine too. But instead, I forced a smile. Well, if you decide to sell it, I'd be interested. It looks a lot like one my grandmother used to have. Oh, that's sweet, Melinda said warmly. Leave us your number, and I'll call you when we decide. I nodded, scribbled my contact information, and thanked her. My hand trembled as I placed the pen down. I was desperate to touch the chair, to confirm whether Grandma's secret was still inside, but I couldn't risk drawing attention. Instead, I took one last look at it before leaving. The sunlight hit the cushion in a way that made the fabric shimmer faintly. I imagined the hidden pocket beneath the seat, the letter, or whatever it was Grandma had hidden there, just waiting for me to find it. As I stepped outside, I could still see the chair through the window. It looked so peaceful, so ordinary, but I knew it wasn't. That chair carried generations of my family, and now it sat in a stranger's shop under someone else's care. The thought made my stomach turn. Driving home, I kept thinking about what Grant said. You'd be surprised what people hide inside old furniture. What if they already planned to tear it apart for restoration? What if they found something before I could get back? By the time I pulled into my driveway, my decision was made. I would go back after hours if I had to. I wasn't proud of the thought, but desperation doesn't leave room for pride. That chair was my responsibility. Owen was sitting on the couch when I got home, scrolling through his phone. Where were you? He asked without looking up. Out, I said flatly. I didn't owe him more than that, he smirked. Still hung up on that stupid chair? I ignored him and walked straight to the bedroom. For the first time since our marriage began, I felt like I was living with a stranger. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, the image of the chair flickering in my mind like a heartbeat. Around midnight, I got up, slipped on my coat, and stood by the window, staring out at the dark street. I was going back. I didn't care how it looked or what I had to do, I needed that chair. As I looked out into the night, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a car passing by slowly, headlights glancing off the trees. I imagined the couple in their shop, the chair sitting under a lamp, the two of them cleaning it, inspecting it. My gut twisted with unease. The next day at work, I could barely concentrate. Every tick of the clock felt like another second closer to losing what Grandma left behind. So when I finally drove past Willow and Pine again that evening, I slowed down just enough to look through the window. The lights inside were still on, even though the closed sign hung on the door. Melinda was there, sitting beside the rocking chair, holding something in her hands, something small and folded that she just pulled from the cushion. My breath caught in my throat as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Through the glass, I saw Melinda holding something small and folded from the cushion. Through the glass, I saw her open a brittle envelope and pull out what looked like an old document. My entire body went cold. The sight of that envelope faded, fragile, clearly aged, made my stomach twist into knots. I pressed closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass. Melinda was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the rocking chair, her head bent in concentration. Grant stood behind her, his hands resting on his hips, watching as she unfolded the paper carefully. The lamplight caught the yellowed edges, making the document glow faintly. I couldn't see the writing clearly, but I could feel it. My grandmother's secret was right there, inches away, in the hands of strangers. I ducked behind a display outside the shop, heart hammering so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. I watched as Melinda's lips moved silently, reading. Then she gasped and looked up at Grant, her eyes wide. I could barely make out her words through the glass, but I caught a few that made my heart race. It's a deed, she whispered. Look, it's dated 1978. Agnes Cole. My knees nearly gave out. Agnes Cole. The room around me blurred as shock washed over me. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop myself from crying out. The paper in her hands wasn't just an old note, it was the deed. The very one my grandmother used to talk about when she thought I wasn't listening. The family farmland she'd lost decades ago. The land she'd always said should have stayed in the family. Grant leaned closer, reading along with her. His brow furrowed, then slowly his expression shifted from curiosity to calculation. I could tell from his face that he understood its worth. Melinda said something I couldn't hear, and he responded sharply. I saw him point toward the back room, probably suggesting they lock it up. I felt sick. My grandmother's secret, her last gift to me, was no longer mine. It was in their hands, and they didn't even know what it meant. Or maybe they did, and that was worse. I stumbled back to my car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. How could Owen have been so careless? Or was it carelessness at all? The more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Owen had never liked the chair. He'd always pushed for me to get rid of it. What if he'd known there was something hidden inside? The thought sent a cold shiver through me. He had grown up in that same small town. He'd heard my grandmother's stories too. What if he had guessed? What if selling it wasn't just thoughtless, it was intentional? I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. What would I even say? My husband sold a chair that might contain a deed my dead grandmother hid 40 years ago? They'd think I was delusional. No, I had to handle this myself. I started the car and drove away, heart pounding in my throat. My mind was already racing ahead, forming a plan. I'd come back later, when the shop was closed. I didn't care how reckless it sounded. I couldn't let that deed disappear into someone else's possession. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in bed with the letter from Grandma spread out on my lap, tracing her words again. Keep it close, for it keeps us safe. Now it made sense. She wasn't talking about comfort. She was talking about protection. She'd hidden the deed in that chair so it would never be lost, never stolen. She trusted that I'd hold on to it. But I'd failed her. By morning, I felt numb. I skipped work and drove straight back to Willow and Pine, parking across the street this time. Through the window, I could see Grant moving boxes near the counter. The chair was still there, but the envelope was gone. I waited until he disappeared into the back, then slipped inside. Melinda greeted me with a polite smile, the same as before, but I could sense her wariness. "Oh, you're back," she said. "Still thinking about that rocker?" "Yes," I said, trying to sound calm. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I'd really like to buy it." She hesitated, glancing toward the back room. "Oh, I'm sorry. My husband's still deciding if we're keeping it or selling it. It's a unique piece." Unique. That word landed like a knife. I wanted to ask her directly, "What did you find inside?" But I couldn't. If she knew its value, she'd never give it up. I smiled tightly instead. "Well, if you change your mind, I'd be happy to pay double." Her eyes flickered with surprise. "Double?" "Yes, it's sentimental. I can't explain it." She nodded slowly, studying me for a moment, then smiled again. "I understand. I'll talk to Grant." But I could tell from her expression that she wouldn't. I left the store, my heart pounding in frustration. As I walked back to my car, I saw Grant step out of the back room. He locked something in the safe behind the counter. I didn't need to guess what it was. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the shop window, rage and helplessness swirling together. My grandmother's legacy was trapped behind that glass, behind that safe door. I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't walking away. I'd find a way to get it back, no matter what it took. And as the sun set behind the cedar trees, the sky burning orange and red, one thought repeated in my head like a drumbeat: that deed is mine. And when Grant locked the paper inside the shop's safe, I knew I was in for a fight. The The next morning, I returned to the shop pretending to be a customer again. My pulse raced as I stepped through the door, the little bell chiming overhead like an alarm. Melinda looked up from behind the counter and gave me the same practiced smile as before, though this time it didn't reach her eyes. I could feel the shift immediately, politeness edged with suspicion. I must have seemed desperate yesterday, and she probably sensed it. I forced my voice to stay even. "Good morning. I thought I'd stop by again, see if you'd made a decision about the chair." She hesitated for a beat before answering. "Grant's still considering it. We've had some interest already." I could tell that was a lie, she just wanted to buy time. I smiled, pretending not to notice. "I understand. It's just that the piece looks so familiar. My grandmother had one just like it, and it means a lot to me." Melinda softened, her expression flickering between sympathy and caution. "That's lovely," she said. "But unfortunately, it's not available at the moment." Before I could respond, Grant emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes locked onto mine with quiet scrutiny. "Back again, huh?" he said lightly, though his tone carried an edge. "You must really like that chair." "I do," I said. "I'd like to buy it. Name your price." He smirked faintly, crossing his arms. "It's not about the price. It's a unique find. We're still appraising it." The way he said appraising made my stomach twist. He knew. Maybe not the full story, but he knew it was worth something. "Well," I said, forcing a polite laugh, "whatever value you've found in it, I can match or exceed. I just want to take it home." Grant's expression hardened. "Sorry, not for sale." There it was, final, deliberate, and cold. I stood there, my nails digging into my palm, fighting the urge to shout. "It belongs to my family," I said quietly. "You bought it from my husband. He had no right to sell it. That chair was mine." Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then you should take that up with your husband, not us." I could feel Melinda's gaze on me, a mixture of guilt and unease. For a brief moment I thought she might intervene, but she stayed silent. My mind raced. If they had already opened the envelope, they knew what they had, and if they knew, they wouldn't just hand it back. I stepped closer to the counter, lowering my voice. "Please? There's something inside that chair that doesn't belong to you. Something important. I just need to get it back." Melinda looked startled, glancing quickly at Grant. His face darkened. "Inside the chair?" he repeated slowly. I realized my mistake instantly. I'd said too much. "I just mean, it's sentimental," I stammered. "My grandmother hid things in her furniture sometimes. It's silly, I know. But the damage was done." Grant exchanged a look with his wife, and I saw at that flicker of realization, that greedy glint that told me they understood exactly what they had. He smiled thinly. "Well, that's interesting," he said. "But as of now, the chair is our property. Anything found inside it is too." My stomach dropped. "That's not how it works," I said, my voice trembling. "It wasn't yours to sell in the first place." He shrugged, unmoved. "Maybe not. But possession's 9/10 of the law, isn't it?" His casual arrogance lit something inside me, a spark of fury so sharp it burned away my fear. "You're making a mistake," I said, meeting his gaze. "That chair isn't just some antique, it's part of my family. It's not for you to keep, or to profit from." Grant leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Then you should have taken better care of it." I stood there frozen, my hands trembling, rage and disbelief clawing up my throat. I turned to Melinda, searching her face for compassion, but she avoided my eyes. That was answer enough. I walked out of the shop with my heart pounding so hard, and it hurt. The crisp morning air hit me like ice, but it did nothing to cool the heat inside me. I'd tried reason, I'd tried pleading, and now I was done asking nicely. When I got to my car, I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The world outside blurred, my mind spinning with one relentless thought: I would get that deed back, no matter what it took. I started the engine, the hum of the car barely audible over the pounding in my ears. As I pulled away from the curb, my reflection in the rearview mirror looked unfamiliar, colder, harder, determined. They thought they could steal from me. They thought I'd back down because I was polite, or emotional, or sentimental. They were wrong. That night, as the sun sank behind the trees and the town settled into quiet, I opened my laptop and started researching the shop's layout, its alarm system, its closing hours. Every ounce of fear turned into fuel. And that night, I decided I'd take back what was mine no matter what it cost me. The streets were silent when I parked behind the shop at midnight. The air was cool, crisp, and unnervingly still. Every sound seemed amplified: the click of my car door, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, even the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Willow and pine looked different at night. The soft amber glow that made it charming in the daytime had vanished, replaced by a dark silhouette under the flickering streetlight. The wooden sign swayed slightly in the wind, creaking just enough to make me shiver. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the back door. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't reckless. I was just a woman taking back what was hers. But even as I told myself that, my hands were shaking. The plan was simple: get in, retrieve the envelope, and leave. No damage, no confrontation, just quiet resolve. I checked the clock on the dashboard, 12:17 a.m. I slipped on my gloves and took one last look at the shop. No lights. No movement. I grabbed my flashlight and a small crowbar from the passenger seat, tools I never imagined myself using. The latch on the back door looked old, rusted, almost delicate. I tested it gently. It gave a little under pressure. My pulse thundered in my ears as I wedged the crowbar between the latch and the frame, applying slow, steady pressure. The metal groaned softly before it gave way with a muted crack. I froze, waiting to hear if anyone had noticed. Silence. My breath trembled as I eased the door open just enough to slip inside. The smell of wood polish and dust filled my nose. The faint moonlight streaming through the front windows gave the place an eerie glow, illuminating silhouettes of old furniture and picture frames stacked against the walls. I moved slowly, careful not to bump into anything. The silence was thick, heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. I knew exactly where I needed to go: the safe behind the counter. I'd seen Grant lock the envelope inside 2 days ago. If I was lucky, he hadn't moved it. I crouched as I moved past a row of lamps and small tables, my flashlight beam dancing over the floorboards. The rocking chair sat near the front window, looking almost peaceful, as if unaware of the chaos it had caused. I felt a pang in my chest when I saw it, a mixture of love, grief, and guilt. I whispered softly, "I'm here, Grandma. I'm getting it back." When I reached the counter, I switched off my flashlight and took a deep breath. The safe sat on the bottom shelf, an old mechanical one with a combination dial. I cursed under my breath. I'd hoped it would be something simpler, maybe a key lock, but this would take time. I ran my gloved fingers across the cold surface, trying to remember how Grant had moved when he'd locked it. 3 quick spins, then a slow turn to the right. Maybe I could guess. I turned the dial carefully, listening for clicks. Nothing. My frustration built. I couldn't force it open without noise, and noise would ruin everything. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something: a small ring of keys hanging from a nail on the wall behind the counter. I reached for them, hands trembling, and flipped through the set. To my relief, one of them looked like it might fit the small auxiliary lock on the safe. I slid it in. It turned with a satisfying click. I exhaled shakily, heart hammering. When I pulled the handle, the safe door creaked open an inch. Inside, beneath a few folders and cash envelopes, was the brittle, faded paper envelope I'd seen in Melinda's hands. My fingers hovered over it for a second before I carefully picked it up. It was lighter than I expected, fragile, like it might crumble if I held it too tightly. My grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable on the front, "Property of Agnes Cole." Seeing her name written there felt like being touched by a ghost. My eyes stung as I whispered, "I found it, Grandma." I slipped the envelope into my jacket, closed the safe, and turned to leave. But as I started toward the back door, a noise cut through the silence, a soft creak, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps from above. I froze. Someone was upstairs. The air shifted, heavy with tension. I could hear the faint thud of movement, a floorboard groaning under weight. My stomach twisted. Maybe Grant lived upstairs. Maybe he'd heard the door earlier. I turned off my flashlight and crouched low behind the counter, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps grew louder, closer. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. A beam of light suddenly appeared on the staircase, a flashlight. Panic surged through me. I crawled toward the back of the store, staying as low as possible. Every inch of movement felt like a mile. My pulse roared in my ears as I edged past a stack of boxes and slipped behind a tall cabinet. The flashlight beam swept across the room, lingering for a moment on the rocking chair. Grant's voice broke the silence, low and irritated. "What the hell?" He descended the last step, muttering to himself. I could hear the floor creaking as he moved closer to the counter. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice the safe slightly ajar. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Then he stopped. The light flickered across the wall, then toward the back of the shop. He was coming closer. My fingers tightened around the crowbar in my jacket pocket, my body trembling between fear and fight. He reached the end of the counter and stood still. I could see the outline of his shoes from under the cabinet. I didn't dare move. Then, after what felt like forever, he sighed. "Damn rats," he muttered. The beam of light turned away. His footsteps retreated slowly toward the stairs. I waited until I heard the creak of the upper floor again before I moved. My entire body shook as I slipped out from behind the cabinet and sprinted silently toward the back door. My hand fumbled with the latch, adrenaline making it hard to think clearly. Finally, the door swung open, and the cool night air hit me like salvation. I ran to my car, my lungs burning, my heart still racing as if I hadn't escaped yet. Someone was still in the building and they'd heard me. I ducked behind a display of lamps just as Grant came downstairs, flashlight sweeping the floor. My body froze as the narrow beam slid across the room, slicing through the darkness like a blade. I held my breath, heart pounding against my ribs so hard it hurt. The envelope inside my jacket felt like it was glowing, like it was calling attention to me. Grant's heavy footsteps echoed softly against the creaking floorboards as he moved closer to the front of the store. "Must have left the damn light on," he muttered to himself. His voice was groggy, irritated, too close. I shifted ever so slightly to get a better view, careful not to make a sound. The beam of the flashlight glided over the counter, the walls, the shelves of antique glassware, and then it lingered on the rocking chair. I could see the outline of his head tilt slightly. For one horrible second I thought he noticed something. Maybe he saw that the cushion had been moved earlier. Maybe he sensed something was missing. But after a long pause, he exhaled and moved on. I could hear the faint jingle of keys in his pocket, the rustle of fabric as he scratched his chin. He yawned. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he turned and walked toward the back hallway, the flashlight bobbing away from me. That was my moment. I didn't think I just moved. My shoes made almost no sound on the worn wood floor as I darted from behind the lamps, keeping low, every muscle tight with terror. I slipped around the counter and into the shadow near the door. My hand fumbled for the latch, slick with sweat. The moment I touched it, the flashlight beam reappeared closer this time, sweeping back toward me. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze again, clutching the door handle, praying the darkness would hide me. The light passed inches from my arm, but Grant's eyes never caught the movement. He grunted softly, turned off the flashlight, and trudged back upstairs. I waited until I heard the dull creak of the top step before I dared to breathe again. Slowly, I turned the latch and slipped out into the cold night air. The door shut behind me with a soft click. I leaned against the brick wall, gasping for breath, every nerve in my body still electric. My hands were trembling uncontrollably. I wanted to cry, laugh, scream all at once. I clutched my jacket close, the fragile envelope pressed against my chest. I had it. I actually had it. The parking lot was empty and dark except for a single flickering streetlight at the corner. My car sat just where I left it, shadowed by the trees. I moved as quickly as I could, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. Every rustle of wind, it sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of leaves sounded like someone calling my name. When I finally slid into the driver's seat, I locked the doors and sat there, trembling. My reflection in the rearview mirror barely looked human, wide eyes, pale skin, and sweat sticking my hair to my forehead. I forced my shaking fingers to fit the key into the ignition. The car roared to life, but the sound felt deafening in the quiet night. I winced, afraid Grant might hear it. Then, just as I shifted into reverse, I saw it, the lights inside the shop flicked on. My blood ran cold. I slammed the car into gear and pressed the gas, the tires crunching gravel as I sped out of the lot. My headlights caught the glimpse of the store's front window. Grant was standing there, his hand on the curtain, watching. I didn't stop to see if he recognized me, I just drove. My heart didn't stop pounding until I was miles away, speeding down the highway under the pale glow of the moon. I didn't even realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. The envelope sat in my lap, fragile and perfect, as if it had been waiting for me all this time. When I reached a gas station on the edge of town, I pulled over, parking under the dim light near the air pump. I turned off the engine, the sudden silence deafening. My hands were trembling as I unzipped my jacket and pulled out the envelope. For a moment, I just stared at it, too afraid to open it. This was what Grandma had hidden, what she'd wanted me to find. I needed to know why. I carefully peeled back the brittle flap, revealing the document inside. The paper was yellowed. The ink slightly faded, but the seal at the bottom was still visible. Official deed of ownership. Cole family estate. My breath caught. It was real. The farmland. The property Grandma had once said should never leave our blood. She'd kept the deed hidden all those years, waiting for the right moment or the right person to find it. Read the fine print. Something strange caught my eye. There, at the bottom of the page, under the line for transfer authorization, was a signature. My eyes scanned it once, then again, disbelieving. Owen Cole, my husband's name. I blinked, shaking my head, reading it over and over. It didn't make sense. The deed was dated before Grandma's death. 2 months before, to be exact. Owen's signature appeared next to hers as if he'd already known about it, as if he'd already taken ownership. The shock hit me so hard I nearly dropped the paper. My own husband had known. All this time, he'd known about the deed, about the land, about everything Grandma had hidden, and he hadn't said a word. Worse, he'd sold the chair knowing exactly what was inside. My chest felt like it was collapsing. I sat there under the harsh gas station light, the truth burning in my hands. Owen hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He'd stolen from me, from her. I folded the deed carefully, tucking it back into the envelope with shaking hands. My tears had dried into something sharper anger, pure and unfiltered. I looked at my reflection in the window and barely recognized the woman staring back. But scrawled across the bottom was a name I didn't expect: Owen's. Owen's signature was on the transfer document dated just 2 months before Grandma died. I sat there in the driver's seat, my fingers trembling as I traced the ink. His handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, confident, deliberate. He had signed his name right beside Grandma's, and that single line split my heart open in a way I didn't think was possible. He'd known. My husband, my partner, the man I'd trusted with everything, had known about the deed all along. And somehow, he'd managed to keep it a secret from me. The first thought that hit me wasn't anger. It was disbelief. I wanted to believe there was some mistake, some reason, some misunderstanding that made sense of all this. But, as I read and reread the document, the reality settled in like a storm cloud. Grandma hadn't just hidden the deed for safekeeping, she'd hidden it from him. By the time I got home, it was past 2 a.m. The house was dark, except for the faint glow of the TV in the living room. Owen was asleep on the couch, an empty beer bottle resting on the floor beside him. I stood there for a long moment, watching him. The man I'd shared a bed with, laughed with, cried with. He looked so ordinary, so harmless. But now, all I could see was betrayal, wrapped in the shape of a familiar face. I placed the envelope gently on the coffee table and nudged his shoulder. Owen. He stirred, groaning softly. What's going on? Wake up. My voice was quiet but firm. Something in my tone made him sit up instantly. His eyes flicked from my face to the envelope, then back to me. Where did you get that? He asked, his voice tightening. You tell me, I said, crossing my arms. You signed it. He stared at me for a long moment, silent, then sighed and rubbed his face. Harper, it's not what you think. Then what is it? My voice cracked, the hurt spilling out despite my effort to stay calm. Because it looks like you knew about Grandma's deed and never told me. It looks like you sold her chair knowing exactly what was hidden inside. He leaned back, shaking his head. You're overreacting. Overreacting? I stepped closer. You stole my grandmother's legacy and lied to me for months, maybe years. And you're calling that overreacting? He groaned, frustration replacing guilt. Harper, it wasn't like that. I found the envelope months ago, okay? I was cleaning up after your grandmother's things. It wasn't even hidden that well. I thought she meant for us to use it. The land wasn't doing anyone any good. I was just trying to take care of it, take care of us. Us? I repeated bitterly. You mean you? He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my eyes. You're being dramatic. You never cared about that land. You didn't even know it existed until now. I stared at him, stunned at the coldness in his voice. That's not the point, Owen. It was hers. It was mine. And you knew that. He scoffed. You're acting like I burned the house down. I sold a chair, a piece of furniture. No, I said sharply. You sold my grandmother's trust. You sold her memory. Something flickered across his face, then guilt, maybe, or fear, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. You don't understand how much pressure I've been under, he said. The bills, the house, everything. I did what I had to do. Without telling me? He shrugged. You would have said no. That's the point, I shouted. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that swallows sound, thick and suffocating. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and uneven. Finally, I picked up the envelope from the table and held it up between us. Do you even know what this means? This land, Grandma's property, it's worth something. It's not just dirt and trees. It's a piece of her, and she wanted it to stay in the family. He laughed, then a hollow, humorless sound that made my blood run cold. Family? She never saw me as family. She couldn't stand me. You know that. I stared at him, and in that moment, I saw him for who he truly was. Not the man I married, but the man who'd been hiding in plain sight. A man who saw love as ownership, trust as leverage. I took a slow step backward, clutching the envelope tightly against my chest. You're right, I said quietly. She didn't trust you. And now I know why. He stood up, his expression hardening. What are you going to do, Harper? Go to the police? Tell them your husband sold your chair? No, I said. I'm going to make this right. Legally. Publicly. Permanently. He rolled, his eyes, turning away. You're not thinking straight. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. For the first time in years, I actually am. He didn't reply. He just went upstairs, muttering something under his breath. I stood there in the living room, the faint glow of the TV flickering over the walls, the house feeling emptier than it ever had. My hands shook, not from fear this time, but from resolve. When I looked down at the deed again, I noticed something else. Grandma's signature looked faint, shaky, almost forced. My stomach churned. Did Owen pressure her into signing it? Did she even know what she was agreeing to? The thought made my skin crawl. As I slid the deed back into the envelope, I made a silent promise to Grandma and to myself. I wouldn't let Owen's greed define her legacy. I'd find a way to expose him, to make sure the land went where it truly belonged. He thought he could outsmart me. He thought I'd stay quiet, like I always did. But he didn't know what kind of woman he'd created through his betrayal. He'd taken the one thing I loved most, and now, he was going to regret it. And if Owen wanted to play games, I was ready to show him just how ruthless I could be. I knew the land was valuable, but more than that, it was mine by right. After that night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every detail of the deed, every word Owen said, every look he gave me when he realized I knew. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even afraid. He was confident, almost smug, like he thought I'd never do anything about it. But he didn't know me anymore. The Harper he married would have cried quietly, maybe begged for an apology. The Harper, standing in the kitchen the next morning, staring at that folded deed on the counter, was done playing the quiet wife. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the table, notebook open, laptop glowing. If Owen wanted to play dirty, then I'd outthink him. I started researching property laws, inheritance rights, and historical land transfers. The more I read, the clearer it became. Owen's signature on that document meant nothing without my consent. Grandma had passed the chair, and what it contained, directly to me. That made the deed mine, and any transfer Owen had attempted was invalid. But I didn't want to just win this quietly. I wanted it exposed. I wanted him and the couple at Willow and Pine to know exactly who they'd underestimated. I called my old friend June that afternoon. She was an attorney who specialized in estate law, sharp as a blade and loyal to a fault. When she picked up, I tried to keep my voice steady. June, it's Harper. I need legal advice and maybe a miracle. Within an hour, I was sitting in her office downtown, the deed spread out on her desk. She read it slowly, frowning deeper with each line. This signature, she said finally, tapping Grandma's faint handwriting, doesn't look voluntary. I've seen this before, people coerced into signing under pressure. I swallowed hard. You think he forced her? June nodded grimly. It's possible. Especially if he had access to her documents before she passed. My stomach twisted. The thought of Owen manipulating my grandmother made me sick. June leaned back in her chair. You have a solid claim, Harper. Legally, this deed belongs to you, but if you want to make sure no one challenges it, we need to act fast. I don't just want to claim it, I said quietly. I want to make sure everyone knows what he did. June's brow lifted slightly. You want it public? Yes, all of it. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said she understood exactly what I was asking. Then we'll do it by the book and make it hurt. Over the next few days, I gathered everything: emails, old photos of Grandma with the chair, even her handwritten notes. Every piece of evidence became another brick in the wall I was building against Owen. Meanwhile, I acted normal at home. I made dinner. I smiled. I let him think he'd won. He started to relax, completely unaware that I was plotting behind that calm smile. When he left for work, I'd sit at the kitchen table, typing up statements and timelines. At night, when he snored beside me, I'd scroll through property records, finding every loophole that could bury him. I learned the language of land law faster than I ever thought possible. Revenge has a way of sharpening the mind. Once the paperwork was solid, I made my next move. I called a local journalist named Fiona who specialized in investigative stories about small-town corruption. I'd read her work before. She didn't back down from powerful people, even when they tried to silence her. When I told her I had a story about hidden deeds, betrayal, and fraud, her tone changed instantly. Meet me tomorrow morning, she said. The following day, we met at a diner on the edge of town. She sat across from me, recorder ready, notebook open. I told her everything: the chair, the antique store, the late-night break-in, and finally, Owen's signature. I expected skepticism, but she listened quietly, eyes sharp and focused. When I finished, she said, "This isn't just theft, it's inheritance fraud. You have proof?" I slid the deed across the table. Right here. She stared at it, then smiled slowly. You're about to make a lot of people nervous, Harper. By the time I left the diner, she'd already promised a front-page feature. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I didn't tell Owen about the interview. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted him to find out the same way everyone else would, by waking up to the truth splashed across the morning paper. That night, I sat in the living room beside the spot where the rocking chair used to be. I could almost hear it creaking softly, like Grandma was still there, urging me forward. You always said to stand my ground, I whispered. Well, I'm standing. When the sun rose the next morning, I didn't need an alarm clock. My phone was buzzing non-stop. I opened the local news app, and there it was, front and center. Hidden heirloom leads to shocking property scandal in Cedar Falls. Beneath the headline was a photo of the deed and a detailed story outlining how a woman discovered a concealed inheritance that had allegedly been sold without her consent. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but the clues were all there. Anyone who knew us would know exactly who the article was about. I sipped my coffee, my lips curling into a slow, deliberate smile as I heard Owen stir upstairs. And the next morning, the story hit the front page. Hidden heirloom leads to shocking property scandal. The moment Owen saw the paper, his face drained of color. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, still in his robe, holding the newspaper like it was a live wire. I was sitting at the table with my coffee, pretending to scroll through my phone, but I didn't have to look up to know exactly what he was reading. I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. The headline was impossible to miss: Hidden heirloom leads to shocking property scandal. Beneath it was a photo of the deed, the corner of the rocking chair visible in the background, and a few carefully redacted names that didn't hide enough to protect him. He slammed the paper down on the counter. What the hell is this, Harper? I looked up slowly, feigning innocence. What's what? Don't play dumb with me, he snapped. You told someone about the deed. About me. I raised an eyebrow. Did I? The article didn't mention your name. Everyone in town will know it's me, he shouted, his voice cracking with anger. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I said calmly, taking another sip of coffee. I finally told the truth. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe, in that moment, he didn't. I wasn't the quiet wife who swallowed her anger anymore. I was the woman who'd pulled the rug out from under him, and he knew it. The phone rang on the counter, cutting through the silence. He didn't answer it. It rang again, and again. until finally he grabbed it, muttering curses. I could hear the muffled voice on the other end, his boss. Owen's face tightened, then paled even further. "No, sir," he said. "It's not what it looks like. It's all been blown out of proportion." Another pause. "Yes, I understand." His hand shook as he hung up. He turned back to me, eyes blazing. "You've ruined me." "No, Owen," I said softly. "You did that yourself." For a few seconds, we just stood there, the air thick with years of resentment finally cracking open. I saw the fear behind his anger, the realization that he wasn't in control anymore. He didn't even try to deny the truth. He knew he couldn't. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. People whispered. Neighbors stared. My phone buzzed with messages, some sympathetic, some nosy, others purely curious. "You okay?" One of my coworkers texted. "We saw the article. Can't believe it's true." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. By noon, reporters were calling the antique shop. Fiona, the journalist, had written the story with precision. She didn't need to sensationalize it, the facts were enough to cause an uproar. Antique store owners stumble upon hidden property deed during furniture restoration, the article read, leading to questions about ownership and family inheritance. It didn't accuse directly, but it hinted perfectly. The people of Cedar Falls loved a scandal, and this one had everything: money, deceit, and betrayal. I imagined Melinda and Grant at Willow and Pine, their phones ringing non-stop, reporters gathering outside their quaint little storefront. They'd wanted to keep the deed. Now they'd have the whole town watching them. By mid-afternoon, Owen's phone was still blowing up calls from his mother, his friends, his co-workers. Each one chipped away at his pride. He paced the kitchen like a caged animal, muttering to himself, while I sat quietly, letting him unravel. Finally, he turned to me. "Fix it," he said, his voice trembling. "Tell them it's not true. Tell them you were mistaken." I looked him dead in the eye. "No, Harper, please," he said, stepping closer. "I'll lose my job, my reputation. You should have thought of that before you forged a signature and sold a piece of my grandmother's legacy." His jaw clenched. "I did it for us." I stood, meeting him eye to eye. "No, Owen, you did it for yourself. You wanted control. You wanted the money, the credit, the power. You didn't care what it cost me or her memory." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. For once, he had nothing left to say. By evening, the tension in the house was unbearable. Owen barely spoke. I could feel his resentment like static in the air, but underneath it, I sensed fear. He knew this wasn't over, not legally, not publicly, not between us. That night, I sat alone in the living room, scrolling through the online version of the article. It had already been shared hundreds of times. The comments were pouring in, unbelievable. How could someone do that to their own wife? That poor woman. Each one was a small dose of justice. Just as I was about to close the page, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. For a moment, I thought it might be Fiona calling for a follow-up. I answered cautiously. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a trembling voice. "Harper, it's Melinda from Willow and Pine." My stomach tightened. "What do you want?" I think we should talk," she said softly. "I have something that belongs to you. Something I think you need to see." I hesitated, suspicion prickling through me. "What is it?" "I'd rather not say over the phone. Please, can you come by tonight?" After closing. Her tone was nervous, sincere, almost frightened. I could hear the hum of the shop in the background, faint, distant music, and the sound of a door closing. I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. "Fine, I'll be there in an hour." When I hung up, I stared at the screen for a long time. My instincts screamed not to trust her, but something in her voice told me this wasn't a trick. I grabbed my coat and the envelope, tucking it into my bag. The night air outside was cold, heavy with the scent of rain. As I drove toward Willow and Pine, my headlights cutting through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever waited for me there wasn't just another confrontation. It was another piece of Grandma's puzzle, another truth waiting to be uncovered. And just when I thought the nightmare was over, I got a call from Melinda saying she had something of mine I'd left behind. I met Melinda at the shop after hours, suspicious but curious. The air was heavy with the smell of rain-soaked pavement as I pulled into the narrow alley behind Willow and Pine. The store's windows were dark except for a single light glowing near the back. My heart thudded as I stepped out of the car, the sound of my boots echoing on the wet concrete. I didn't know what to expect: an apology, another confrontation, or maybe a trap. When I reached the door, Melinda opened it before I could even knock. She looked different this time, tired, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy knot, her usual cheerful expression replaced by something haunted. "Come in," she said quietly. The shop was silent except for the faint hum of a ceiling fan. The rocking chair sat in the middle of the floor, lit by a small desk lamp. I froze at the sight of it. Even after everything that had happened, it still looked serene, innocent, as if unaware of the chaos it had caused. Melinda gestured toward the chair. "It's yours," she said softly. "We read the article this morning." Grant was furious. He said we should deny everything, but I couldn't. She swallowed hard. I didn't know what was really at stake when we found that envelope. If I had, I never would have kept it. I studied her face, searching for deceit, but all I saw was exhaustion. "Then why call me now?" I asked. She hesitated, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She placed it gently on the counter between us. "Because we found something else," she said. "Under the chair's seat lining. We didn't notice it before." My pulse quickened as I picked it up. The fabric was soft, worn, and tied with a thin gold string. I loosened it and let the contents fall into my hand: a locket and a folded piece of paper. My throat tightened. The locket was old, gold, heart-shaped, and engraved with the initials A.C. I opened it carefully. Inside was a faded black and white photo of my grandmother as a young woman, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize, maybe her father, maybe someone she'd lost long before I was born. Opposite the photo was a tiny inscription etched in curling script: "Trust your heart, Harper." The note was even more fragile, the paper nearly translucent. I unfolded it slowly, afraid it might tear. Grandma's handwriting filled the page, shaky but familiar. "If you're reading this, my sweet girl, then I'm no longer here to tell you what I should have said long ago. People will disappoint you, but the truth will never lie. If someone in your life tries to take what's yours, let them, because they can never keep it. What's truly yours always finds its way back." Tears welled up in my eyes before I even reached the end. Her words weren't just advice. They were prophecy. Everything that had happened, the loss, the betrayal, the discovery, it all led me back here, to this chair, to this moment. Melinda's voice broke through my thoughts. "I think she meant for you to find that after the deed," she said quietly. "When I read the article, I realized you weren't just some angry customer. You were protecting something sacred." I closed the locket, holding it tight in my palm. "Thank you," I whispered. "For calling me." She smiled weakly. "You don't owe me thanks. You deserve what's yours." She glanced toward the rocking chair. "Grant doesn't know I called you. He's not happy with me. After the article, people stopped coming by. He blames you, but honestly, I blame us. We let greed get in the way of doing the right thing." For the first time, I believed her. Maybe she really didn't mean harm. Maybe she'd just been caught up in something bigger than she understood. "I don't want trouble for you," I said. "You did the right thing tonight. That matters." Melinda nodded, wiping her eyes. "Take the chair, Harper. It belongs to you." I looked at the chair one last time before I approached it. My hands trembled as I ran my fingers along the armrest, the smooth wood still carrying the faint scent of polish. "She always said it was the heart of the house," I murmured. I never realized how right she was. Melinda helped me carry it to my car. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, soft and rhythmic, like the world itself was exhaling. When we placed the chair in the trunk, she hesitated, then touched my arm. "Be careful with it," she said. "Something tells me it's not done teaching you yet." I managed a small smile. "I think you might be right." The drive home was quiet. The world outside my windshield was dark and wet, the road gleaming like glass. I kept glancing at the chair in my rearview mirror, its curved silhouette faintly visible in the dim light. Somehow, just having it near me again made me feel grounded, whole. When I got home, the house was silent. Owen wasn't there, I didn't know where he'd gone, and honestly, I didn't care. I carried the chair inside and placed it right back in its corner, by the window where it had always belonged. The moment I set it down, something inside me eased, like a piece of my soul had finally clicked back into place. I sat in it, the familiar creak filling the quiet room. I clutched the locket to my chest and rocked slowly. breathing in the faint scent of old wood and rain. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. Not closure, not yet, but peace. The letter still lay open in my lap, Grandma's words glowing faintly under the lamplight. I traced the final line with my fingertip and whispered, "You were right, Grandma." It came back. And just when I thought I'd found every secret the chair had to offer, I shifted slightly and felt something odd beneath me. A soft, uneven bulge in the cushion. My heart skipped. I pressed down gently, feeling the outline of something hidden within the padding. But when I got home and sat in it again, I noticed something else, another loose seam in the cushion. I carefully opened the seam and pulled out a small envelope wrapped in wax paper. My hands trembled as I tugged at the loose threads, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears. I didn't know what I was expecting this time. Money, another document, maybe even a photograph, but as soon as I saw the wax paper's edges, I knew it was something fragile, something deliberate. Grandma never did anything by accident. She'd hidden not one, but two secrets inside this chair, and that realization sent a chill through me. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table, turning on the overhead light. The room filled with a warm yellow glow as I sat down and carefully peeled away the wax paper. Inside was a folded piece of stationery, worn soft from age, and a small pressed flower violet, brittle, perfectly preserved. I set the flower gently aside, afraid it might crumble under the slightest touch. Then I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was familiar, graceful loops, faint pencil smudges, the kind of script that carried emotion even in silence. My grandmother's words began, "My sweet Harper, if you've found this, then you've already learned the hardest truth, that love doesn't always protect us the way we hope it will. People will hurt you, even the ones who swear they never will. But strength doesn't come from how well you hide the pain, it comes from how you rebuild afterward." I could barely breathe as I read. My fingers traced every curve of her letters like they were sacred. She'd written this for me, decades ago, as if she knew exactly what kind of woman I'd become and what heartbreak I'd one day face. The land, the papers, even this chair, they're not your true inheritance. They're symbols. What I'm leaving you isn't property or wealth. It's the reminder that you come from women who survive. Whatever this world takes from you, you'll always have the power to take back more. Tears streamed down my cheeks before I even finished the next paragraph. She'd seen through time itself. It seemed her wisdom crossing the years to meet me exactly where I was broken. And when you sit in this chair, remember that it's seen every version of us. The mothers, the daughters, the wives, the widows. It carries every secret, every strength, every choice we've ever made. It's yours now, not to guard, but to grow from. Don't let grief make you smaller, let it make you unstoppable. By the time I reached the end, my vision was blurry. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling the weight of her love wrap around me like a blanket. I sat there for a long time, rocking gently, listening to the faint creak of the chair echo through the quiet room. It sounded almost like breathing, steady, alive. Each creak was a frantic heartbeat, each sway a whisper from her. For so long I'd been consumed by anger at Owen, at the antique dealers, at myself for letting this happen. But in that moment, sitting there with her letter in my lap, all of that melted away. What replaced it wasn't forgiveness. Exactly. It was understanding. Grandma hadn't just left me a chair or a deed or even a locket, she'd left me a map to who I was supposed to become. A woman who stood her ground. A woman who refused to be broken by betrayal. I looked around the room, realizing how much of my life had been defined by fear. Fear of losing love. Fear of being alone. Fear of standing up for myself. But Grandma had known better. She'd known that loss was never the end. It was the test. I reached for the locket hanging around my neck now, the one I'd found earlier that night, and held it tight. The inscription, "Trust your heart," Harper glimmered faintly under the light. I finally understood what she meant. Trusting my heart didn't mean forgiving the people who hurt me. It meant trusting that I could heal without them. It meant knowing I didn't need Owen, or his apologies, or anyone's validation to reclaim my life. The house was quiet except for the soft rain tapping against the windows. I leaned back, rocking gently, reading the letter one more time. My tears had dried, replaced by something calmer, peace, maybe, or purpose. The chair creaked under me, steady and rhythmic, like it had been waiting all this time for me to sit in it this way, not as the scared granddaughter clinging to the past, but as the woman who finally understood what the past had been trying to teach her. I glanced at the deed lying on the counter, the envelope beside it, and smiled through the ache in my chest. The land, the papers, the scandal, it all mattered less now. The real treasure wasn't the inheritance Grandma had hidden, it was the strength she'd left behind. I whispered into the still air, "Thank you, Grandma, for everything. I get it now." Outside, the rain began to ease, and the faintest streak of moonlight broke through the clouds, spilling through the window and across the floorboards. It landed right at the foot of the rocking chair, lighting up the faint carvings in the wood. I leaned down and traced them tiny, almost invisible initials. A. C. plus H. C. My breath caught. She'd carved them herself, our names, side by side. Agnes Cole and Harper Cole. A connection that would never fade, no matter how much time passed. I pressed my fingers against those initials, the wood warm beneath my touch. "You really did think of everything, didn't you?" I whispered. Then I leaned back again, letting the chair rock slowly, the creak of wood steady and comforting. I didn't feel anger anymore, or grief, just a quiet, profound gratitude for her wisdom, her secrets, her love, and her lessons. But peace didn't mean the story was over, because one final truth was still waiting on that land itself. A month later, I drove out to the old family property with the official deed in hand. The road stretched ahead like a memory, long, quiet, lined with pine trees that swayed in the wind. It was the same road Grandma used to drive when she took me out here as a little girl, back before the land was lost. The tires crunched on gravel as I turned onto the old path that led to the fields. For years, this place had existed only in stories and faded photographs. Now it was mine again. When I stepped out of the car, the wind carried the faint scent of cedar and earth. The land spread out before me, wide and untouched, golden from the late autumn sun. The hills rolled gently toward the horizon, and the air was so still that even my footsteps sounded too loud. I held the deed close, the paper fluttering slightly, and felt something deep inside me settle a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying, finally lifting. I walked slowly through the tall grass, my fingers brushing against the dry stalks. Every step brought back flashes of childhood, Grandma humming while hanging laundry on the line, her old straw hat tilted against the sun, me running barefoot through the dirt, laughing when she called me her little shadow. I could almost hear her voice in the wind. When I reached the old oak tree at the center of the property, I stopped. Its branches stretched wide and strong, roots deep and steady. This was where she used to sit with me, where she told me about the land, about the history of our family, how it had been passed down for generations until it was taken through fancy words and crooked signatures. I smiled through the tears that stung my eyes. "You were right, Grandma," I whispered. "It's back where it belongs." I sat under the tree for a long time, tracing the veins of the leaves that had fallen around me. I opened the locket and looked at her photo again, the same smile, the same quiet strength. For the first time, it didn't make me ache. It made me proud. The days that followed moved like water. I started coming out to the land every morning before work, just to walk, breathe, and think. It became my sanctuary, my reset button. The noise of the town, the gossip, the stares, the remnants of Owen's mess faded the moment I set foot on the soil. June helped finalize the legal transfer, ensuring everything was in my name, permanently this time. The process was long, but she was relentless. When the papers were finally signed, she handed them to me with a small smile. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said. "I hope so," I replied. "I just wish she could see it." "She does," June said softly. "In her way, she does." It was around that time the idea came to me, not in a burst of inspiration but slowly, like something that had always been waiting beneath the surface. I didn't want to sell the land or fence it off. I wanted to share it. I wanted it to mean something. Again. So, I made a decision. I'd build something here, not a business, not a monument, but a place of healing. A retreat for women who'd been broken and were trying to rebuild, just like me. I named it Agnes Haven after Grandma. The first few weeks were rough: permits, cleanup, and more logistics than I could have imagined, but I didn't care. I worked alongside volunteers, cleared brush, painted cabins, and planted flowers where weeds had overtaken the soil. Every blister, every ache felt like progress. The land that had once been a symbol of loss was becoming a home for second chances. When the cabins were finally finished, I placed a rocking chair in each one. They were all replicas of Grandma's crafted by a local carpenter who carefully mimicked every curve, every creak, every worn edge. He even added small carvings beneath the seat, the initials A, C, in honor of her. The first group of women arrived in late spring. Some came quietly, others with tears still drying on their cheeks, but all of them carried the same look I once had: tired, uncertain, desperate to feel whole again. I didn't tell them every detail of my story, not at first. But one evening, when the sun was setting and the porch lights cast a golden glow across the property, I sat them down and shared the truth: the chair, the deed, the betrayal, the secrets. They listened in silence, some holding their cups of tea a little tighter, others nodding like they'd lived pieces of it themselves. And when I finished, one woman whispered, "You didn't just get your land back, you found yourself." I smiled. Maybe that was her plan all along. As weeks passed, Agnes Haven grew into something real. Laughter replaced silence. Hope replaced fear. Every rocking chair on that land carried not just my grandmother's memory, but the strength of every woman who came to heal here. Sometimes, at sunset, I'd sit under the old oak tree with my notebook, watching the light fade across the hills. The air would fill with the sound of creaking chairs from the cabins, soft and rhythmic, like a symphony of resilience. On the last evening of summer, I brought the original rocking chair, the one Grandma had given me, back to the tree. I set it down, sat in it, and closed my eyes. The earth beneath me felt steady, alive. I could almost feel her there beside me, her presence warm and familiar. I whispered, "We did it, Grandma. It's safe now." The wind stirred the leaves above me, soft and steady, like a sigh of contentment. I smiled through tears, the kind that didn't hurt anymore. As the stars began to appear, I thought about everything she'd taught me without saying a word: how strength doesn't mean never breaking but learning how to rebuild. Because sometimes, the real inheritance isn't what's written on paper, it's what we find in ourselves after the loss.